Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Sarah and One Pulse Poetry for inviting me to cold winter, which is not so I'm so happy to be here. But no, seriously, thank you for coming and listening to poetry. This first poem I'm going to read is called One Country. I want to be released from it. I want its impulses stunned to lead. This body, its breath, let it. Let the whole pageant end. If my body had a river in it, I would drain it. If by the river was a city, let a storm shock and drown it. If in the city was a boy made sick from his body, the freak passions of it, let him come out, his brown skin lifting as a shell. Let it. Let all his limbs pop and unhinge. First his penis, its quick flight as of a comet. The 8 fingers next, then thumbs, then tongue, till every star is on the floor dismissed, each pointing in its own direction, each another door to the one country where his body is loved and made for. So as was said, never quite in that way. I'm from New Orleans and I'm based in Brooklyn, but New Orleans is very deep in my heart and in my blood and also in this book, particularly through this notion of the Southern Gothic. We were just talking about things that obsess us, and that's something I could add. Like, I grew up reading that kind of literature, not knowing it was Southern Gothic literature until I went away to New England, and then they told me this is Southern Gothic, and so I said, I guess I should begin to research and see what this is all about. And so I started to use, unconsciously, I started to use that in my poetry, and then at a certain point, it became conscious. So this poem next uses that sort of lens, and it's called Conditions for Southern Gothic. Therefore my head was kingless. I was a head alone moaning in a wet black field. I was like any of those deserted slaves whose graves are just the pikes raised for their heads, reshackled, blue and plain as fear. All night I whistled at a sky that mocked me, that fluently changed its grammar as if to match desire in my eye. My freedom is possible, it said. As if my torn off head in that bed, swamped and whelming them with water, had one wish, and it did. To think strangest stuff. To break that boring need to always have a shadow trail its maker, such that 1, the shadow snaps, rising to kiss the head. 2, the kiss lands, the head flies up in airy revolt. 3, crack from the head come the crows of its thinking. 4, 3 crows move in minstrelsy against the night. 5, and the head still singing last night, a Negro was asked. Who among us was made to scratch a myth, speak? If God made us in his image, it was the first failure of the imagination. Something else I can say now is, like, I feel like the whole entire landscape of this book needs to be the landscape in Lemonade, if you've seen Beyonce, which I've been obsessed with since. I'm just going to be obsessed with it. But it's really, I'm still processing it, but I like it, I'm not a hater. But it's really nice to see represented the place that you come from and to see it represented in a way that seems faithful and true. But also there's some violence attached to geography as well, which I think is a part of this too. So, yay Beyonce for that. This next poem has no real introduction. It's called I Dreamt 2 Men. I dreamt 2 men hoisted, hung up, not American, the rope not closed on their breathing, but this rope tied them spine to spine, somehow suspended from the mood of a tree. Not American, they were African, Ugandan, Nigerian, without a license or right to touch the sin they're touching in sights. And I heard their names called out, revision or die, and you must repent and forget the lie, you lily boys, you faggots, called up from the mob of their mothers, their fathers with Christ in the blood, who had Christ in the blood, who sung out, abide with me. This was my eyes closed-eyed vision. This is what a darkness makes. And how did I move from that distance to intimacy? So close I could see the four soles of their feet. So close I was kneeled, could lick those feet as if I was, because I became the fire who abided. I saw that. I dreamt their black skin made blacker by my feeding. I thought, Christ, why did I think their black skin tipped blacker by this American feeding? But just one shot up a cry, African. It was American. Oh Lord, abide with me. It was human, lusty, flat. You had to be in the hollow of it to taste it. You had to see how in such lack invention takes hold. They say some dreams come in the moment of waking, stitched because daylight likes a story. That some dreams are extensions of an itch, thief walking the coral of the brain. I say, but I did feel that one blue mouth blow out as I felt the mood of that tree. As I saw the other turn away, apart, stay with silence, I stayed with southern silence. Thank you. Just a few more poems. We just talked about my whole life. So I also like to think about visual art a lot. I didn't know this until I got up to this podium. And so yeah, I like to, I sometimes think I'm a wannabe or failed painter, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I just want to have that sort of aesthetic upon my eye and look at the world that way. So I happen to write a lot of nephrastic poems that meditate on those works. So this next poem is a nephrastic poem. Also, it's a poem that's at Cornell, which we were just talking about too, which I've never been to just yet. I'm going to go for the first time this summer, but the painting is in the museum there, and I've seen the painting over the internet and stuff like that, but I haven't seen it in person, which is interesting to me because I think it allowed me a certain intimacy with the poem, but also gave me a sort of distance as well. But anyway, the title of the poem is also the title at times attributed to the painting, and it's called Vanitas with Negro Boy, 17th century oil on canvas. I'll show you a bone made to hold on to, a pip, a dense fire which once the thinking imagination sprawled like a breathing vine. He would put the skull on the table, and nearest to the worn flowers, sir, or nearer to the flute, turned just so not to be too crude. That was the boy's job, this cage with a debt in it. And whose boy am I, and what is my name? Black, erasing blackness, body and backdrop. You were not permitted to enter the question like as of his skin, as if it were a field, a mind, a word inclined to be entered. It's true. His face, his boyhood even, and what is my boyhood? And where is it from would fade if not for the rope of attention yanked glittering across that face. Look, this is my painting, my version of the Dutch Stilleven. I'm trying to write obsession into it, and can. Open your eyes, don't run, vanitas from the Latin for emptiness, meaningless, but what nothing can exist if thought does, if the drawn likeness of a bone still exists. Why trust the old masters? Old masters never trust me. Listen, each day is a Negro boy, chains slogging out of the waves, panting, gripping the sum of his captain, the head ripped off, the blood purpling down, the red hair flossed between the knuckles, swinging it before him like judgment, saying to the mist, the not, then quietly, only to himself, this is what I'll do to you, what you dream I do, sir, if you like it. I sometimes like to read quotes by other people to break up the monotony of my own voice. So this is James Baldwin, and this is from an essay called The Male Prison. Whether or not homosexuality is natural seems completely pointless to me. Pointless because I really do not see what difference the answers make. It seems clear in any case, at least in the world we know, that no matter what encyclopedia of psychological and scientific knowledges are brought to bear, the answer can never be yes. And one of the reasons for this is that it will rob the normal, who are simply the many, of their very necessary sense of security and order. Beautiful bottom, beautiful shame. The way he writhed beneath the other man argued his loneliness. But he wasn't just a blank measure waiting to sound. However much an O his mouth made, it wasn't just an O. Thrusting back up against what is almost like a finger, though it isn't. always needing to be touched like a finger, to be held. I'm lonely. My waist cinched inward like some vintage Japanese fan, the clever blade of my back working inch by inch toward a pleasure half mine, the way fire pleases, wax pleases. What does possession mean? No, really, tell me. That at this moment someone beside myself can feel how many times I shudder. Asked if I like it, I like it. I speak out those 3 syllables, mess myself. The point is, I think, to empty. It feels good. To be 2 men interlocked in a sentence still forming. We dance the dance that says, I want you. Come closer, come in me. No, really, he said as a whisper, boy, you want to be possessed. Because you see, he had been removed from his body then, per usual. His beauty like a talisman offered, his woundedness revealed. I'm going to read 3 new poems and then run away to my shame. Embarrassment. It's a personal, it's not about you. So I was so busy watching Lemonade obsessively that I was like just scribbling like when I went to read, so I'm like looking at it, I'm like, what do I feel like reading? I'm going to read this one. So this picks up the sort of southern things happening. At some point, well, at least for me, I realized, okay, when I'm going, I was also in grad school, so you have to write a thesis. So I realized what I'm doing is writing a book. And then, for some reason, it just announced, like, I need to write a book about Spanish moths. I just have to do that. That has to be done. I don't know why, but that image came in my head. And later, in retrospect, I thought, you know, I grew up in it is limited. I grew up and there was Spanish moths coming from the trees and all of this, which is at once a reality, an actual like emblem of where I come from, but it's also this sort of picturesque, maybe even cliche of New Orleans or the South. So it was like trying to wrestle with this, and you may have this for your own cities or your own locations of like what is true of your city, but also is maybe a stereotype or a kind of cliche of that. And I think that's something interesting. So that led me into this poem, which is called Writing an Elegy. But so tangled in the branches, they had to leave it. The conquistador's black beard cut from his head whose neck had snapped. His deadness, the others had to burn them for the wind to take evenly away. If not for his lust, his sickness to chase, to claim her, if not for that native woman's quick intelligence, no climbing. This is what I see. The Spanish moss has convicted to its branches, gray, colonial, but in my century now, suspended so close each vein might well be a whole hanging fiction of my mind. The moss is a fiction of my mind, a screen swinging on its Gothic hinges, making the light fussier as it swags, giving not just the trees, but my idea of them a Medusa look. That man, I think, had wanted to feed something in himself not worth feeding, had founded a world on it. What is it my mind wants to get at? Always extending, hungering, looking back, always tearing open again its own modernity, as if each thought is more than the little present moment it sounds like, but raised at an angle, piercing me, having me imagine to build such antique violences in my head. It is a thorn. This moss has been growing for ages now, can do nothing but snag and grow. What is it the mind won't unsee? Beautiful flaw. In another version, the woman dies, and her husband braids her hair through the trees. Yeah, and I'm going to end with this poem. Thank you for listening. You're very attentive. So this is the title poem. It's also another Frasic poem. There are several in here. And this one is, when I went to St. Louis, I lived in St. Louis, I went to Washington University for grad school, and I was probably very sad that day, as I usually am, when I was walking around down the street. That's not true, but that day in St. Louis I was. So I was walking down the street and I went to this, what do you call it, antique shop. I don't know why, I couldn't afford anything in there, it made me sadder, but I walked around and I found, there was a statue of a boy, and the boy is like this Greco-Roman boy pulling or removing a thorn from his foot. And something about that, I was like, that's cool. Couldn't afford it, so I just took a picture and like for Instagram. And then it became a book. So that's how things work, right? So the thing about that statue is that it's an ancient statue that's been replicated, you know, since whoever made it from the first time. There's copies of it in Rome and I guess St. Louis or all over the world. So this is Bulgathorn. Thank you again. 1st century BC, bronze. 1. Entered, those shadows spoke his loneliness like a god. 2. This was new knowledge, the kind he had little business knowing, the mere risk of it making it all the more delicious. 3. A forced out confession of forcing it in. 4. Each push where the blood yawned like an opiate, each inch a hermeneutics of the self. 5. Would you feed on such hurting? Would you drink so much? 6. Was he so terrible a thing to look at, but was looked at? 7. His face chiseled deliberate, his face a question gone unanswered. 8. There could have been a thorn already inside, his tongue scratching its wrong, speaking in 6 troubles. 9. How? 10. There could have been a thorn already inside, the point in his eye, what makes the shadows their acutest when they lift and sprawl. 11. I keep thinking of the thorn as a marker, scrawler, which shapes the places both excused and forbidden in his body swamp. 12. Violence thou shalt want, violence thou shalt steal and store inside. 13. This Benario, Fidel, a boy with a message, a mission, pickaninny, who would not stop for damage, the old story goes. 14. Shame, guilt, spleen, woe, shock, and want. 15. He wanted them gone. I know all his deeper hurts, poorer gods, that lush resentment. 16. But failed. They were greater dark vows and mystery, done things. 17. Take it. Don't you have to learn to take it eventually? 18. I told him the thorn was as a key, his body a lock. 19. I made him meet the key up with the lock. Turn. 20. I told him, Rickey, turn. 21. He did an antichrysalis, a lyric which is the piece of a prayer visible. 22. Until he rewound, a new republic, a kingdom where not savagely he was king. 23. Who could bear the wind? 24. Who could feel the self demanding the self? 25. Who could see his honesty, his face more handsome once the pain combed through, combed like a river too clean for love? 26. Violence thou shalt want, violence thou shalt steal and store inside. 27. He would devour it. 28. This was his body finally his. 29. He shut the thorn up in his foot and